A freighter carrying a crew of 29 disappeared on Lake Superior during a severe storm last night, and so far, no survivors have been found. The freighter, the Edmund Fitzgerald, was transporting iron ore when it ran into high winds and 25-foot waves. Rebecca Bell has the story.
Few ships, or shipwrecks for that matter, have become such an American household name as the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. Even after 50 years since the sinking of the ship, it still remains one of the most famous maritime disasters in American history, probably surpassed only by something like the Titanic. However, while many people know the Fitz went down with all of its crew on her, many people don't know the full story, nor do they know the effects that the event had on the Great Lakes as a community. So, with the half-a-century mark of the sinking of the ship upon us, this is the deep dive into the full story of the Edmund Fitzgerald. I feel like the Great Lakes are an area that's often overlooked as a key part of America, especially in the past. I mean, during the height of American industry, the Great Lakes region was one of the most important places in the country. You had Detroit as the world capital of the auto industry, Cleveland being a massive steel producer, Chicago acting as a financial center, probably only behind New York in scale, and smaller places like Buffalo or Milwaukee adding their own economic or cultural relevance. The importance of these cities, and then by association, the Great Lakes, cannot be understated as once the industrial heart of America. So in light of that, you then find the largest freshwater transportation system in the world linking all these hubs together. This results in thousands of people working directly on the lakes, including mariners themselves, as well as dockhands, repairmen, lock operators, and portmen. Not even to mention the people who provide the goods and materials shipped on the Great Lakes. Even in 2022, with this region experiencing a significant economic downturn, over 250 million tons of cargo was still moved throughout the lakes. And all of this culminates in quite the staggering amount of death statistics for both men and ships. As of right now, it is estimated about 6,000 shipwrecks have occurred on the Great Lakes, although some put this number even closer to 10,000. As for people, the Great Lakes has claimed somewhere around 30,000 mariners that have braved its waters. The early 1950s marked really the start of the economic peak of the Great Lakes region. This post-World War II time saw a huge expansion in manufacturing, particularly in places like Detroit and Milwaukee. With this industry expansion brought a great need for minerals like iron, used to produce steel in the giant mills of places like Gary or Buffalo. And with that brings a great need for a vessel capable of transporting said materials. So on February 1st, 1957, the largest ship ever on the Great Lakes was ordered. The Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company of Milwaukee had invested in this massive freighter, and the Great Lakes Engineering Works in River Rouge, Michigan got to building this marvel. The length of the Fitz was a staggering 729 feet long, with a beam or width of 75 feet. This was the maximum size allowed for the Sioux locks at the time. There were two engines on board that produced 7,500 horsepower. The ship weighed almost 14,000 tons, like holy. And all of this cost at time around $8.4 million or around $90 million today. Some other important factors included a welded hull made of high tensile steel, instead of the industry standard at the time being riveted steel. This alone set apart the Fitz as a modern engineered ship. The launch of the ship was on June 8th of 1958 and really reflected the grand nature of the ship. Over 15,000 people attended the ceremony held at the same shipyard that it was built, just south of Detroit. And well, you guys know how they break a bottle on the ship to christen it? Well, as Mrs. Edmund Fitzgerald attempted to break some champagne on the bow, it took 3 times in order for the bottle to break, a sign of bad luck. As well as when the ship slid into the water, it struck the dock and damaged a nearby pier. Again, not a good sign. But besides bad omens or old sailors' lore, the Edmund Fitzgerald was still a sight to behold. The ship really represented the pinnacle of the region. It was a source of pride as well as a display of what American industrial might could do. And that was felt not only by the company, but the people of the Great Lakes as well. Often called the pride of the American side, the Edmund Fitzgerald's life, like most stars, was short and tragic. It is possible she would still be going today, as these ships are meant to last decades. However, it is also possible she would have been scrapped. I've seen a lot of opinions on both ideas. But I would imagine she would still be seeing some kind of use today. Maybe that's a little romantic, but it's possible. Nevertheless, the 17-season life of the Fitz consisted mostly of shuttling iron ore from the harbors in Minnesota to ports on the lower Great Lakes. She averaged 47 to 50 round trips per season, hauling nearly 1.2 million tons of ore annually, and quickly gained a reputation as one of the fastest and most reliable ore carriers on the Great Lakes. She began to set cargo records. Like in 1960, she became the first ship to haul over 1 million tons of ore in a single season. Or in '69, she carried a record 27,402 long tons of ore in one trip, the most ever moved on the Great Lakes at the time. So you can start to see where the nickname, the pride of the American side, comes from. A typical crew consisted of about 29 to 32 men, including a captain, 3 mates, 3 engineers, deckhands, oilers, and a cook. The shipping routine often looked like this: load iron ore in Duluth or 2 harbors, transit the Great Lakes, unload at steel mills around Detroit or Toledo, and then return north for another load. This typically would take 2.5 days per round trip, and this would result in around 748 round trips and a staggering approximation of 20 million tons of ore moved during the Fitz's 17 seasons. Captain Ernest McSorley prepares to depart the Burlington Northern Ore Dock 1 in Superior, Wisconsin, near Duluth, Minnesota. The Fitz contains a cargo of 26,116 tons of taxonite pellets. They are bound for the same trip they have made so many times, to the U.S. steel plants of Zug Island near Detroit. Weather forecasts do show a storm brewing, but predict it will pass below Lake Superior. Nothing out of the ordinary. All right, guys. So, a couple thousand miles later and 30 hours of driving, and we're here on Lake Superior. Towards that way is Duluth, Minnesota. Towards that way is Superior, Wisconsin. And behind me is the last place the Edmund Fitzgerald ever docked. We're at Burlington Railroad number 1. Number 1 is the one closest to Duluth. And this is the last land that the Edmund Fitzgerald ever saw. This is a pretty routine stop for it. It's about 9 in the morning right now, and this time, on November 9th, 1975, the Edmund Fitzgerald was filling up with iron ore. And it's pretty crazy to see it. I wish I could get closer to it, but it's all on private property, and I was told I would get arrested. So this is fine though, you can still see it. We'll get the drone up in a second. But yeah, it's pretty crazy. This was the last place it filled up, and then she would go out through this canal, which I'll show you on the drone, and then pass by the lighthouse out to Lake Superior, which we'll also show in a second. This is some overhead drone footage that I got of the ore docks. You can see the one right below is the number 1 dock that the Fitz would load up at. And from my understanding, this is how they would load the freighters with ore. This is a gravity-fed system. You can see the pulleys hoist and tip the train car and then funnel into the hatchways of the freighter. We then move on after the Fitz is filled up to the Superior entry. This natural harbor was discovered in the early 1860s, but since then has been modified quite a few times in order to meet the shipping requirements of the area. And as for the lighthouse itself, the first iteration was built in 1858, and the one still standing was built in 1913. Unlike the ore docks we saw, the lighthouse and canal are still very much operational and operated, acting as a gateway to Lake Superior. The Edmund Fitzgerald clears the Superior Harbor and is now on its way to the Sioux Locks near Whitefish Bay. Winds from the northeast at 25 knots with a light snow. As the Fitz passes by 2 harbors headed east, another ship, the SS Arthur M. Anderson, commanded by Captain Jesse B. Cooper, departs from this dock. The waves are around 6 to 8 feet and the wind is increasing. All right, guys, and we're here in Two Harbors, Minnesota. Welcome. We're about 45 minutes north of Duluth at the iron ore docks. These were built in the early 1900s to, you guessed it, ship iron. But behind me right now actually is the Edgar Spear. It's a 1,000-foot freighter, a lot like the one we saw in Superior. I would love to get the drone up and get a look at it, but we're experiencing quite an amount of wind right now, about 30 miles an hour with some gusts. But it's okay, we're holding in here. I was told in the parking lot to watch for waves or me and my camera will get wet. But we're taking the risk. But we're here for the simple reason that this is the spot that the Arthur M. Anderson filled up on November 9th, 1975, right before it sailed out to meet the Edmund Fitzgerald. So yeah, quite the look. I'll get out of the way a little bit. You might be able to see some stuff. I would have loved to see the railroad and the iron ore facility, but not really the best weather. The Fitzgerald still maintains about 14 knots. However, this is where it starts becoming apparent that the storm will in fact hit Superior and hit it hard. Weather deteriorating, National Weather Service issues a gale warning. The previous gale warning is upgraded to a storm warning, predicting winds of 48 to 55 knots and waves of 10 to 15 feet. The Edmund Fitz and the Anderson push on along through Lake Superior. The storm intensifies rapidly, winds from the northwest at 50 knots, visibility near zero in the snow squalls. But the Fitz reports everything functioning normally. Both ships pass near Isle Royale and turn southeast toward Whitefish Bay, the destination of the trip they have made so many times. The Fitzgerald reports a steady roll but is maintaining speed with the Anderson about 10 miles behind. The winds reach 70 miles an hour, with some waves now at 20 feet. Radar interference is heavy due to the snow. Visibility is zero. This is also about the time the Anderson lost actual visual sight of the Fitz. From then on, only radar could see the ship. This was the last time anyone would see the Edmund Fitzgerald. Captain McSorley calls the Anderson. Anderson, this is the Fitzgerald. I have a fence rail down, 2 vent covers off, and I've got a list. A list is when the ship bends due to weight in the hull. The Fitzgerald also reports she is taking on water but has pumps running. The Fitz slows down so the slower Anderson could catch up. They were about 5 hours from Whitefish Bay. The Fitzgerald radios that her radar is completely out and she is blind in the storm. The Anderson agrees to provide radar bearings at regular intervals, using the point on the radar of the Fitz relative to other points to steer the ship in the right direction. The Anderson logs waves 25 to 30 feet, wind gusts near 80 miles an hour. They are gaining on Whitefish Bay, however, being only about an hour away. The first mate of the Anderson asks the Edmund Fitzgerald, "How are you making out with your problems?" The Fitzgerald responds, "We are holding our own." These were the last words ever heard from the Edmund Fitzgerald. At this point, both ships are in near hurricane conditions, 30-foot waves, wind gusts 80 miles an hour, and snow and sleet. The snow stops and the sightline over the waters returns. The crew of the Anderson scans the horizon for the lights of the Edmund Fitzgerald, to no avail. The crew thought she had lost power, so they began looking for a silhouette. They began calling the Fitz on the radio repeatedly, to no avail. Captain Cooper even radios other vessels to ensure his radio is indeed working. He asked these vessels if they had seen the Fitz. They had not. The Anderson informs the Coast Guard of the situation, telling them, "I just hope she didn't take a nosedive." Search and rescue crews are launched from Sault Ste. Marie and Air Station Traverse City. This is also where a group of heroes reveal themselves in this story, as the crew of the Arthur M. Anderson. As the Coast Guard asks if they would brave the storm to help locate and save the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald, they agree. No survivors and no ship. Only debris is found. 2 lifeboats, 1 badly damaged, life rings, and light wreckage. The damage on the lifeboats showed that they were not launched from the ship. Some fuel and oil was found on the top of the water, but not very much of it. Radar scans on the 14th of November showed a split freighter on the bottom of the lake, although it could not be proven to be the Edmund Fitzgerald. In May of '76, the Navy brought in a camera and proved that it was in fact the Edmund Fitzgerald. In 2 pieces, 535 feet deep, rests the great ship. The ship is broken into 2 sections, with the bow lying upright and partially buried in the lake bed, and the stern resting capsized about 170 feet away. And welcome, guys, to the last stop on our tour, Whitefish Point, Michigan. It's a chilly morning, almost 8 a.m. here. You might still be able to see a little bit of remnant of a sunrise behind me. A little bit of wind, nothing like last night. Coming in, quite a bit of wind and some freezing rain. Today's actually one of the only nice days forecasted for the next week. Snow is supposed to be coming, a lot of things. But about 17 miles behind me, that's northwest of Whitefish Point, in half lies the Edmund Fitzgerald. In about 530 feet of water, she's split in half down there with all of her crew, and they never got to see the sunrise on November 11th. That is where she will lie, and her crew, probably forever. Behind me right now, too, you can actually see a freighter passing by. I can't make out the name on it, but they probably passed right over, or somewhat over, the shipwreck. And also a lot of shipwrecks, as from here to Grand Marais, Michigan, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'll throw it up on the screen if I do or don't. It's called the graveyard of the Great Lakes. This is kind of home to an abnormal amount of shipwrecks, which might make the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald a little bit more unusual, not unusual, as you might think. But yeah, just still so many reminders that say, you know, this is still a way of life out here. You can still see the lighthouses operating. You can still see the freighters going by. This is still very much, you know, a line of work for many people. The Edmund Fitzgerald, I think, me personally, I often look at it as something in the past, simply because maybe the wreck, simply because, I don't know, the song is old. I think a big reason that I don't live in the Great Lakes, I have never been to the Great Lakes. So, you know, I don't really see them or anything like that. But yeah, I think it's really important for everyone who doesn't really live around here to connect the fact that, you know, this is still happening. You know, they didn't just end shipping when the Edmund Fitzgerald went down. It is still a very real thing, and still very much a thing going on. The sinking is still shrouded in a lot of mystery. How the Edmund Fitzgerald sank will never be completely known. However, the leading theory suggests that the hatchways that cover the cargo hold were improperly closed or damaged during the storm. Because of this, the cargo hold would fill with water from the waves rolling over the deck. It may also have been hit by a massive rogue wave or a series of large waves. This is supported by the Anderson crew report of being lifted by huge waves and fearing sinking, estimating the Fitzgerald would be hit by the same waves about 10 minutes later. There is a possibility that a series of 3 rogue waves, sometimes called the Three Sisters, may have contributed to the sinking. The Anderson was hit by at least 2 of these large waves. And so with these huge waves and all the water that the Edmund Fitzgerald had taken on, it is thought that the ship plunged nose first into one of these 3 waves and couldn't recover, then abruptly sank. This is backed by what the Coast Guard found. A lot of people do not agree with this, however, both back then and still nowadays. Many people, including Captain Cooper, think it had to be damaged in the hull of the ship, as either it ran aground or had a hull stress fracture, broke apart, and then the propeller actually drove the back of the ship to the bottom of the lake. This is also backed by an inspection a week earlier which reported that the ship had some stress and many fractures in the hull. I think we kind of get used to these stories of far-off shipwrecks, and then to realize that something like this happened in every American's backyard, as well as the fact that this really wasn't that long ago, is kind of mind-blowing. So putting aside the theories or the conspiracies or even the memes, it's really important to remember this as an American tragedy. The Gordon Lightfoot song is truly a work of art, masterpiece, and I am surprised it hasn't been featured more in this video. But a couple of my favorite lines from that song are, "And all that remains is the faces and the names of the wives, the sons, and the daughters." And that's really what this story is about. That's what this video is about. That's really real. This isn't some rich billionaire sinking on a yacht somewhere exotic. This is 29 working class men who are trying to provide for their families and get home. And to also mention, this was supposed to be Captain McSorley's last trip before retirement. This was supposed to be it for him. It is also important to remember the crew of the Arthur M. Anderson, who went back into the storm to try and save those who needed it. I think if there's something you could really take away from the Edmund Fitzgerald, it is that remembering not only a tragedy, but the people involved in said tragedy is so important. Over the course of this video, I've had such an amazing opportunity to dig deeper into this event and how it affected so many people. And with that, I hope that the story is as relevant as it is today, another 50 years in the future. On that note, I would like to end this video with some information regarding the 29 lives lost in the Edmund Fitzgerald. Thank you very much for watching.